Good morning. My name is Pastor Kelly. I get to serve on staff as one of the pastors. If you're new with us, feel free to go ahead and have a seat. My name is Kelly. Again, if you're new, if this is your first time or your first time in a long time, go Patriots. We are in a series called The Real Jesus, and we are in our second installment. And you know, we get to talk about some pretty interesting subjects. As Mark guides us through the life of Jesus, we get to see what is happening. We get to ask some real questions and walk away with some real life change, hopefully. Today, our topic is something that I've dealt with my whole life, ever since my mother, to my elementary school teachers, to my employers. It's the topic of authority. I don't know if you're like me, but I am known to have an authority problem. Maybe you grew up with authority problems. Maybe you are the problem. I don't know. But today we are going to be talking about authority. And I have authority problems in my life. And right now, the one authority problem that I have in my life is my mother-in-law. Now, my mother-in-law, I love her. She's amazing. She's thoughtful. She's considerate. She's kind. She's involved. And she's deeply committed to my family. She also has opinions. Real ones, helpful ones, consistent ones, unrequested ones. She has opinions about how I spend my time, how we raise our kids, and how often we should wash our hands, which is interesting because she's not even in the room half of the time. Now, let me be clear. This is not a mother-in-law problem. This is an authority problem. And when she makes these comments, especially about my parenting, I typically smile. I'm a good boy. I smile. I nod respectfully, but quietly, under my breath, I say, no, thank you. I've seen your results. And I honestly, I realize that when I receive advice that's unsolicited advice feels like criticism. It does. And criticism I don't respond to criticism likely. And I'm sure you don't respond to criticism well as well. And what I realized that people giving advice is fine, but when your advice sounds like direction or directives, that's when we start to have a problem, don't we? And that's exactly how we treat Jesus. See, we think Jesus is great when he's giving us encouragement and he's leading us beside still waters because he's our good shepherd. But sometimes when Jesus's words start sounding like direction instead of suggestions, maybe we get a little uncomfortable, don't we? And what Mark is showing us is that all of us have authority issues. Not just me, clearly. And that's exactly where we're finding ourselves today, in Mark chapter 1, verses 16. See, Mark is asking or answering the question today that if Jesus is truly the God King, we talked about how Jesus is the God King. If Jesus is truly the God King, what authority does he actually have in our lives? Right? That's the question that Mark is answering in today's passage. And what we will find in Mark, starting with chapter 1, verse 16, we'll find that the real Jesus has the authority to call you out of whatever you're in or call you into something that you're not in already. Does that make sense? So join me in Mark chapter 1, verse 16. You can take out your Bible apps or use your note sheet, or we even have it on the screen. Let's go ahead and read that kind of together. I'll do the reading out loud. You can just listen. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, he saw Simon and his brother Andrew casting a net into the lake, for they were fishermen. Come, follow me, Jesus said, and I will send you to fish for people. At once they left their nets and followed him. When he had gone a little further, he saw James, son of Zebedee, and his brother John in a boat, preparing their nets. Without delay, he called them, and they left their father Zebedee in the boat with hired men. Now, let's unpack that together. Verse 16. As Jesus walked beside the Sea of Galilee, now pause. The Sea of Galilee is one of the most fertile, it's not an ocean, it's actually a lake because it's only like 16 miles long and 8 feet wide. But it's shallow enough to provide enough fish, like for it's like one of the major fishing regions in the Eastern world. And so, Simon and Andrew had a pretty lucrative fishing business. This is how they were going to make their money. And this was going to be a family business that was going on and on and on through generations. And Jesus was walking beside the Sea of Galilee, and he decides to call them out to be their disciples. Now notice this, that rabbis don't choose disciples by going out and scouting for them. They don't do that. They're not like a basketball team that's like scouting, colleges. Rabbis don't do that. People, disciples, learners are the ones in this century that go after rabbis. Much like now, if you were applying for a really high-end prestigious college, you would be the one applying. And what we see with Jesus is that Jesus actually is the one who's going after disciples and not expecting the disciples to necessarily come after him. And I hope that brings you some peace, knowing that the same call that Jesus had on them is the same way Jesus might be calling some of us today, coming after you, meeting you where you're at, on the shores of whatever sea that you're living in. In verse 17, come follow me, Jesus says, and I will send you out to fish for people. Now, notice that what Jesus doesn't say. He doesn't say, sit with me, study under me, agree with me. No, he says, follow me. The word in Greek is akolotheia. Akolotheia. You can try to practice saying it, just don't spit on your neighbor. Akolotheia literally means to walk behind, walk behind. Now, this is a type of teaching that doesn't happen in rows and with notes, but it happens on roads and in boats. Talking at tables, eating meals together, interacting with the things that your rabbi is interacting with. And akolotheia in the first century, what a person would say to a disciple of a rabbi, they would often say this to the disciple: may you be covered in the dust of your rabbi. That was meant to be a compliment. And what that means, I think that would make sense if my rabbi was a mechanic, but what this meant was that when the rabbi would be walking along the roads, going to different places, doing different things, you would walk so closely behind your rabbi that the dust from his feet would kick up on you and you would be covered in the dust of your rabbi. And that's partially why we have such great records of the New Testament, of the life of Jesus, because what was happening is these disciples were writing down everything that their rabbi did, interacting, memorizing, and mimicking the things that their rabbi was doing, akolotheia. That's why we have the Bible written in the way we do with great accuracy, is because these disciples were not invited to a classroom, but they were invited to life with Jesus, to living with him, participating in the things that he participated in. And in verse 18, we see kind of the most ideal response when Jesus calls. And he says this: at once they left their nets. At once they left their nets and followed him. Again, notice that Jesus is not responding to their acumen or their potential. Jesus is acting with authority, like a CEO of like a major tech company like Elon Musk, just going down to the organization, maybe to the custodial department and saying, hey, you, come with me. I'm gonna teach you how to lead this thing. I'm like, right, because the CEO can do that. It's his company, right? Jesus is acting like he has authority over people's lives, and he's not responding to acumen or potential. He just goes to the beach and calls some guys out. And they respond immediately. This is how I want my children to respond. They're not disciples yet. Pray for me, guys. So they respond immediately, at once, without delay. Simon and Andrew, what they do, they leave their nets. And then James and John, they leave their father in a boat. Now, keep in mind, these are two major things to leave behind. Leaving your occupation, leaving your family. I don't know. I honestly don't know what's harder. Like, you need your occupation to feed your family. You need your family, period. But most people leave their family, right? You're gonna have kids, or if you have kids, they're gonna go off and leave you and start their own family. That happens. But most people don't just leave their occupation, especially in the first century, especially when you have a lucrative family business like fishing. And the question and the concern that I want to address regarding this passage is, does Jesus ask us to abandon our work and our family? And I'll tell you no. The answer is no. And the reason why is because you see, James and John, they do fish again. Simon and Andrew end up at their mother-in-law's house with their family, just in a couple passages. So what's happening here? Jesus is not asking people to leave their family. He's asking them to reprioritize them. He's not telling them to stop fishing. He's just telling them to no longer make fishing your highest priority. Fishing or family members cannot be your highest priority when we're going to say yes to Jesus. And when we say yes to Jesus, everyone benefits. Our families benefit. Our occupations benefit. Jesus is not asking you to abandon anything. He is just reordering our priority. Because when we say yes to Jesus, it changes our relationship to other things and causes us to say no to other things. When I say yes to a job, I say no to other things. When I say yes to one Super Bowl party, I'm saying no to other Super Bowl parties. If you're saying yes to the Patriots, you're saying no to the Seahawks. I'm all about unity here. No division. There's neither slave nor free, no Jew nor Greek, nor Seahawk or Patriot, for all can be one in Christ. Bless you. But every yes requires a no. Every yes requires a no. See, I remember 2013 or 2012. Oh, I gotta get that right. It's my anniversary. My wife, I saw the chapel doors open up. I saw her dad and her walking down the aisle, and her dad places her hand into my hand. And I had the biggest smile ever. And I felt a tear just fall down my cheek. Not necessarily because I love my wife, but because I was mourning all the women whose heart will now be broken as a result of me no longer being on the market. So they will weep, they will mourn, and they will wail. Simply because I said yes to Michelle, I will have to say no to the rest of the world. And it's true. It's true when we say yes to Jesus also. There are things that we say no to. Not necessarily responsibilities, but rival authorities. And there are 4 rival authorities in my life that I want to share with you. And maybe you share some of these rival authorities that we have to say no to and realign the priority where they live in our life. When we say yes to Jesus, we're saying no to rival authorities. Here are 4 rival authorities that maybe we can consider saying no to this week. Number 1, self-preservation. And if you're taking notes, that's the fill in the blanks. Self-preservation. That's choosing safety over obedience. Number 2, it's self-seeking. It's living for advancement or control. Or number 3, self-indulgence, which is letting comfort lead our decisions. And number 4, self-righteousness, where we are trusting in our own goodness instead of God's grace. So here's the invitation. Give your yes to Jesus. Give your yes to Jesus. But it will require saying no to some rival authorities. I hope saying yes to Jesus feels so much better than saying yes to these things. And so that's where Mark meets us here in this passage, that, if Jesus is really the God King, what authority does he actually have? Well, number 1, the real Jesus has the authority to call, and number 2, the real Jesus has the authority to cast out. Meet me in verse 21. as we look at this part. I really like this part. They went to Capernaum. And when the Sabbath came, Jesus went into the synagogue and began to teach. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority, not as the teachers of the law. Just then, a man in their synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out, "What do you want to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." Verse 25, "Be quiet," said Jesus sternly. "Come out of him." The impure spirit shook the man violently and came out of him with a loud shriek, or with a shriek. Verse 27, the people were so amazed they asked each other, "What is this? A new teaching and with authority. He even gives orders to impure spirits and they obey him." News about him spread quickly over the whole region of Galilee. Okay, what does this mean? Verse 22, people were amazed at his teaching. The people were disoriented. That's what they were, right? In the first century, at a synagogue, if you don't know what a synagogue is, it's kind of like a gathering like this where somebody would teach from the Bible or from the Old Testament. And typically, rabbis would teach in the synagogue, but they would be more focused on information, not transformation or even application. But what they were focused on were on what other people had to say about the Torah. And so they would read something from the Torah and they would say, this person says this, but this person says this. Next, and it was so unsatisfying because you don't leave with resolution or even application. And nevertheless, you still learned a lot. Granted, you learned a lot because knowledge does exist in synagogues. But when Jesus showed up, it was a huge contrast. It would be the difference between somebody teaching a book about a person versus the person telling you who they are. It's like the difference between reading a biography than listening to the person that the biography is about. That's the kind of authority that Jesus taught with, because when he read the Old Testament, it was about him, and he's the author anyways. And people were disoriented. They didn't know what to think about it. And I don't necessarily know if it felt better or worse for them. They just noticed. But you know what else they noticed? Demons. Now, verse 23. This part really messes with me because I don't necessarily like to talk about this type of stuff. It makes people feel uncomfortable, but it happened. Verse 23, just then a man in the synagogue who was possessed by an impure spirit cried out. I'm just saying, like, if I'm a skeptic and I'm reading the Bible, that's when I put it down, okay? I get it, but I want you to notice something here. Where does this impure spirit show up? In a religious context, not in a back alley, not in some sort of seance or some exorcism, but in a very prestigious religious environment in Capernaum where you would think, surely there's not going to be, I'm safe from demons here. I mean, there's a rabbi and there's a Bible. But the demon actually, the impure spirit shows up and starts to say things. He says, what do you want to do with us? Now this phrase means, why are you interfering? Why are you interfering and why are you intruding on our space? See, what this spirit understands is that God in a bod is Jesus. And they didn't expect God to show up there that Friday afternoon or evening. They were expecting God to show up on Judgment Day, and they were scared. They're like, today's not the day, is it? This can't be the day. And secondly, they never expected God to show up in their religious context, ironically. It would be as if, remember being in middle school, and you would go to math class, and the math teacher was doing some mathing all over the board. And then school would be over after 6 hours, and you would go home. And then you'd go home, and your mom, like, oh, we got to figure out dinner, so we'll go to the grocery store. So they'll go to Harmon's or Costco or whatever. And while you're at the grocery store, out of the corner of your eye, you suddenly see your math teacher and you're like, oh, what are you doing here? I don't expect you to actually exist outside of the context I know you in, right? That's what's happening with the spirits. They don't expect to see Jesus. They are shocked. They are discombobulated. And they were hoping it was not test time. And then the demons actually keep talking to Jesus. You know what I call that? Prayer. And they say, I know who you are. You're the Holy One of God. And Jesus shuts that down right away. Why does Jesus shut it down? Obviously, they have good theology. These demons know that Jesus is the Holy One of God, and they hate it. But Jesus shuts them down right away. Why? Jesus does not want the affirmations of demons. Because you can have the right things in the wrong mouth at the wrong time, and it distorts the message. You can have the right thing at the wrong time, out of the wrong mouth, and it distorts the message. Because destructive, divisive, demonic religion does not allure people with a bunch of lies. It allures people with a bunch of half-truths. And Jesus does not want the message to be distorted. So what is an impure spirit? I know that's what you're waiting for. What's a demon? And are they here? And I'll tell you the same thing that my professor told me. There are no demons here other than the ones that you brought in with you. Hashtag Kevin Lewis, Biola 2017. So an impure spirit is anything or any idea that seeks to distort reality or distort your view of God. That's what that is. Any idea or anything that seeks to distort reality or your view of God, those are impure spirits. And those things rise up in us all the time. And Jesus will want to say to those things, be muzzled, be quiet. And he did it then, and he does those type of things now. And you can actually ask Jesus to quiet the things, the thoughts, the ideas that are distorting your view of God and distorting your reality. Notice how Jesus deals with this spirit. He says, come out of him. There's no ritual, no holy water, no crucifix, no silver bullet. Just stop, come out of him. And the same language that Jesus uses is the same language that Jesus uses to calm storms and to quiet chaos. So here's the point. When Jesus is in the room, you don't have to be afraid of the dark. When Jesus is in the room, you don't have to be afraid of the dark because the darkness is afraid of him. A couple years ago, my son Deacon, I was sleep training him so that he no longer attempts to sleep in my bed so that parents can sleep through the night and be functioning human beings in the morning. But then he got creative. He started coming out of his room in the middle of the night. At first it was just water. I'm like, nah, there's a bottle in there. And then it was just, I gotta blow my nose. There's tissue in there. But then he's like, try to figure it out. He's like, Dad, there's monsters in my room. I'm like, oh, man. I need to teach him to deal with the darkness now. Because if he doesn't, he's gonna have to learn how to deal with the darkness without me later. So I told him, this is what you say when that monster shows up in the dark. This is what you say. I say, fear, get out of here. Jesus is near. Fear, get out of here. Jesus is near. I try not to make it rhyme, but it happens all the time. But so, fear, get out of here. Jesus is near. And I'm like, say it out loud. And he says it. I'm like, how do you feel? He's like, better. I'm like, good, go to bed, right? And so, but the thing is that there's darkness in our life all the time. But instead of submitting it to Jesus, what do we try to do? We try to negotiate. We try to medicate or distract, try to manage. We try to coexist with patterns and behaviors that Jesus is trying to silence in our lives. And if Jesus has authority over demons in a synagogue, then that means he has authority over the anxiety in your chest, the shame that you're trying to manage, and the fear that you keep obeying. And if we're being honest and we're at coffee, I would be honest with you about the fear that I'm trying to manage, even right now. And if I'm going to be honest with you, I want you to be honest with me, or at least be honest with yourself. And what I would say to you is that I have a massive fear of failure. And it shows up in how long it takes me to prepare an email or to respond to a text message because I'm deathly afraid of hurting your feelings or saying something wrong. And every day I have to climb out of the hole of fear. But I can't do it on my own strength or on my own goodness or on my own self-power. I have to rely on Jesus. And one Bible verse that I have to rely on that I've found a lot of peace in is in Isaiah 50, verse 4. And Isaiah 50, verse 4 says this: "The sovereign Lord has given me a well-instructed tongue to know the word that sustains the weary. He wakens me morning by morning, wakens my ear to listen, like one being instructed." Like one being instructed, which means I don't have to worry about being an instructor as long as I wake up willing to listen like one being instructed. That brings me peace. It recalibrates, it silences the voices, it recalibrates what reality actually is. And it brings clarity to who God is in my life. Because that's what demons do. They distort reality and distort your view of God. And if you can cut the noise by introducing Jesus into your darkness, well, you will find freedom. And the question isn't whether or not Jesus has authority. We know that. The question really is whether or not you will trust him with the dark places in your life. I share with you mine. What's yours? Think about it. Write it down. Mark makes it really clear that the real Jesus has authority to call, number one. Number two, he has authority to cast out. And number three, he has the authority to cure. He has the authority to cure. Verse 29 says, "As soon as they left the synagogue, they went with James and John to the home of Simon and Andrew. Simon's mother-in-law was in bed with a fever, and they immediately told Jesus about her. So he went to her, took her hand, and helped her up. The fever left her, and she began to wait on them. That evening, after sunset, the people brought to Jesus all the sick and demon-possessed. The whole town gathered at the door, and Jesus healed many who had various diseases. He also drove out many demons, but he would not let them speak because they knew who he was." Now, let's look at this. Do you know that this all happened in one day? Like, Jesus started his breakfast by looking for disciples by the beach. Then he ended up in a synagogue, casting out demons and teaching people the Bible. And then for dinner, he went to Simon Peter's house and resurrected his mother-in-law. I'll unpack that. Simon Peter's mother-in-law was sick. Now, this literally means she's incapacitated. She is laid out sick. And now, rabbis don't go chasing after sick people, just so you know, because that would make them unclean. But Jesus is God, and what he does is make the unclean clean. And so Jesus, verse 31, says he goes to her, takes her by the hand, and raises her up. The Greek word for that is egiro. Can you say egiro? Egiro. It means to raise, to awaken, to bring back to standing. Mark tells us this. Why? Because the same language that is used to raise Simon's mother-in-law up is the same language that is used when Jairus' daughter is raised from the dead. It's the same language that is used when Jesus is risen from the dead, egiro. Mark wants us to know that the power of life and death are in the hands of the greatest authority that has ever touched down on earth, and that is Jesus. Later, Mark will use this language later on. Jesus doesn't treat this illness, but he reverses the effect of the fall. Verse 31, and she began to do what? So she was healed, right? She was sick and she was healed. What does she do? She gets up and starts serving everybody else. Usually when you, not usually, but if you were half dead and you were healed, people would probably check on you and cater to you. But she is so restored that she has enough strength to do all the things that God wanted her to do that day. The application is not promising that Jesus will heal every sickness now. That is not the application of this passage. However, what Mark is showing us is something far bigger, far greater. What Mark is showing us is that people follow him, demons obey him, and sickness releases at his grip, which means every realm of existence responds to Jesus' authority. That's what that means. Every realm of existence responds to Jesus' authority. So in conclusion, Mark shows us a world, basically a day in the life of Jesus, where everything responds to Jesus, which raises the question, if everything else obeys Jesus, then why do we resist him? If everything else obeys Jesus, then why do we resist him? What I want you to do today is examine the 4 realms of resistance that I brought up earlier and ask yourself, which realm do you have a hard time submitting to Jesus? Most of our resistance shows up in 4 places. Number 1, self-preservation, where we start to tell ourselves things like, I'll follow Jesus as long as it feels safe. Number 2, self-seeking, where we say, I'll obey if it benefits me. Number 3, self-indulgence, where we say, I'll surrender as long as it doesn't cost me my convenience now. Or number 4, self-righteous, where we say, I'll trust my own goodness instead of God's grace. Which one still has authority in your life? 1, 2, 3, or 4? Circle that. You don't have to show it to your neighbor. And Jesus doesn't want to condemn you or crush you in these things. He wants to call you out. And it starts with giving Jesus your yes today. These are the realms of authority that are competing. And all Jesus is saying, hey, if I have the authority to call, to cure, and to cast out, well, maybe today I might have the authority to be your king. And if you've never made Jesus the king of your life, our hearts are looking for a king to crown. Would you crown the one and only king, the one who's worthy, the one who has the authority over life and death? Would you crown him and give him your yes? And may this song be your prayer.